Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us here at the American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. My name is Andy Frisky. I am a senior dream curator here at DreamBank. And on behalf of our team, so thrilled to have you all with us here today. As we get started, we always like to learn where you're joining from and encourage you to share so in the chat section. And again, going back to the beginning, very much appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to join us here. If you're able to do so, encourage you to have your cameras on, fully engaged. Paul's going to be asking questions, wants you to ask some questions too. So please go ahead and utilize that chat button as the presentation progresses. But we'd love to share a few moments here about DreamBank. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar, so here at American Family Insurance, we believe that communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. And that's why DreamBank was created a little over 10 years ago. It's an inspirational community destination and digital experience that is dedicated to dreamers everywhere. Offerings are designed to help you celebrate the dream journey, overcome obstacles, and to stay motivated. But without further ado, really excited for today's featured speaker, Paul Reeder. So Paul is the Executive Director for the Center of Innovation Strategies at The Ohio State University. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Paul. Paul, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I actually like your title better. I think Senior Dream Creator just sounds like way more fun. So maybe that's our first entrepreneurial lesson, which is, pick a title that really expresses where you are in the world and what you want to do. So once again, thank you very much for letting me come and have this discussion today. And as Andy said, we want to encourage you to put some notes into the chat. I'll do my best to try to keep an eye on that and answer some questions, because I don't want this just to be, me yapping for 40 minutes before we get to our Q&A. So I really want to make sure that we keep this an engaged conversation. I won't go into long detail about me, because reality is that entrepreneurship is available to everybody. I was really lucky early in my career that I generally found myself to be unemployable in a structured society. So I immediately started my own company because it was easier, excuse me. And so in that process, I started 5 or 6 different ventures, depending on what you acknowledge as a venture, and sold most recent one in 2008 before I came to Ohio State in 2012, initially to run a Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship together. And then we decided that corporate innovation was a better pathway. And so we focused on corporate innovation. And now I run this group called the Center for Innovation Strategies. So that's really all you kind of need to know about me in this discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share, because that's a little bit more interesting. And let me start that now. All right, so you've seen this, so I'm going to just go ahead and move past that one right now. But this is really when I started to talk to Andy about what we want to do in this discussion, we created this overview, and I think it's important, particularly what we bolded out there, that's important, that this is going to be a practical discussion. This is not a theoretical discussion from an academic to talk about the structure of entrepreneurship or the financing of your idea. This is really to talk about creating an entrepreneurial mindset, the process that you might go about in that development of that mindset, and then some aptitudes that sort of allow you to, or give you permission perhaps even, to explore that entrepreneurial mindset. I also believe heavily that we're talking about entrepreneurship from the inception of your own curiosity. So if you look at entrepreneurship as a spectrum, from the catalyst of a notion that something could be better to a launch and running of your company, we're going to be way on the left-hand side of that. I want to be in a position of really having this discussion about curiosity, and how that is one of the first steps in my opinion, which is really all this discussion is going to be kind of today. There's going to be a lot of other opinions and really good ones out there. This is my thought, that you start with this concept of curiosity, and then you move through the development of strategy. And that starts with the identification of problems or opportunities, and then maybe we'll talk a bit about pathway. But most importantly, the overview of today's discussion, and what I hope also is part of the reason why you are here joining us, is that we want to talk about creatively solving problems using critical thinking and your growth mindset. So I will interchangeably use the term entrepreneurial mindset and growth mindset because I like that term growth mindset so much, because it says that regardless of the position that we're in, we have this ability to grow in our thinking and think uniquely and differently. So at the end of this 40 minutes or so, and then the Q&A, which I want to be really rolling along, I want you to come away with perhaps these 4 sort of thoughts, right? So the first one being inspire this mindset. And when I say inspires, I really do want you to leave this conversation today and be like, all right, I am ready to go now. I've been thinking about this idea for a long time, or I've got this side gig I've been thinking about, and now I feel some confidence to just jump out there and do it. So that's really important, that I want you to be inspired. I also want then those of you who might be in a corporate environment to begin to switch your mindset to innovation. And as I said, embracing change and challenge. This is one of the coolest things that can happen. You might find yourself with an organization and you aren't creatively moving in a direction that you want to move in, but that you have this great ability to say, I want to switch to this innovation mindset. I want to switch to a mindset of acknowledging problems and then learning how to overcome those challenges as it might relate to the company that you're within and or your own venture. And I hope to also create some confidence in that there's some really practical steps that I'm going to talk about today that should provide you with some notion that says, that's really not that difficult. and I think that's probably a really critical point to make very early on, is that you will inevitably read a lot about entrepreneurship and about the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and all the challenges and these people who grind all night long. And you know what? The reality is that anybody can do this, that you just have to take that first step towards, I want to change something. And now I potentially have some ability to step through that. The last slide in this deck that Andy will have for you as well has some really good resources. Just the first 4 books that came to mind that I think are really good resources, because I really am also an avid reader, and I think this is a great way to hear different opinions. But I think the last outcome that I want us to be thinking about today is to recognize that this is not, the entrepreneurial mindset is not always about just starting a business, because that stops a lot of people. They say, well, I've got this great idea for, to change something, or there's this opportunity that I could really take advantage of, but I don't really feel comfortable with business. I don't feel comfortable with accounting or finance or raising money. Let's just say right off the top that having an entrepreneurial mindset does not always have to result in the starting of a business. It could purely be creating a new pathway within the organization you're in. It could be changing your own life to give you a creative outlet. It could be working in a nonprofit area. So let's not immediately put the brakes on because of this word business that tends to stop too many of us. Also, Andy, I want to point out that because I'm in presentation mode, I can't see the chat. So if there's some really awesome questions, let me check and make sure.
Sounds good. I've been monitoring
Okay.
as well, so I'll pop in if I see anything come up.
Yeah, I mean, I have to bring it up to see it. So if you pop in, that would be awesome. If there's some good questions, which I'm sure there will be, that are coming up. So, okay, so let's talk about growth mindset a little bit. Make sure I'm on up. I'm jumped ahead too quick. Let's first talk about the sort of aptitude or a curious attitude, because I really like that notion. And so I like this graphic as a way of thinking about this process, and that you'll see in literature that this is commonly called the fuzzy front end. What I like about that term, the fuzzy front end, is it implies that if you're exploring at the beginning of a process of being curious, that it is going to be fuzzy and you're going to wander around as this path indicates. And that wandering around is actually really perfect, because if you were to say, all right, I have curiously found this this problem that the world has, and I want to solve that problem. You could start on the blue dot on the left, and you could run a straight line to the blue dot on the right, and probably solve the problem and launch a company that nobody would care about, and it wouldn't make any money, and you would be left scratching your head as to wonder why you did that. So part of the reason that I talk about this fuzzy front end is I want you to think about, you have this curious mind and you begin to see a challenge that you could alter, right? So I want you to wander around and be comfortable with that ambiguity, be comfortable wandering into spaces or while you're doing your research that said like, man, I don't think I'm anywhere close to where I thought I was supposed to be, but I'm finding something that's very interesting. Keep finding that, dig into that hole until you say, okay, I think I've exhausted that and I need to turn around, right? So it's this idea of being comfortable with that ambiguity in this fuzzy front end that allows you to slowly change the amplitude of your wandering and to be more focused towards, an end goal of solving that problem or potentially launching a business. So that's the first point about this curious attitude, is be comfortable with ambiguity. And that's very difficult for people, particularly because we live in an environment that is very results oriented, that doesn't have the temperament of allowing for wandering. So you're going to have to create that environment within your own mindset and your own process to let yourself wander as you begin to understand a problem better. I think the second point here is really critical that we're seeing, and I'm really happy about this. We're seeing much more discussion around customer-centric focus. For a long, long time before this concept of design thinking, which we'll touch on later in this discussion, before this group called IDEO really brought design thinking or consumer-centric approach, it was really all about the business. Let's make more money. Let's save some money. Let's scale it to, an astronomical height. And then people started to say, but wait a second, have we forgotten that there's actually a customer or an end user in this equation that we have to understand? And I can tell you that this is in every conversation I have with every company I talk to, whether it's a small startup or it's a large corporation, that having a customer-centric approach is really going to be critical to understanding the types of problems you're trying to solve. The next being this observe and practice seeing. And this is a funny statement to make because it's so general. You might say, what does that mean? Observe and practice seeing. As an example, I run a program that helps to encourage entrepreneurial mindset with high schoolers. And yesterday in our session with them, we had them go to the window and just look out the window and tell us what they saw. Because their project was going to be around creating a community venture project. And I want them to see the community. And so we had them stand there for an uncomfortably long period of time, for them just to practice seeing. What do you see? Like really look at this. Oh, do you see trash? Do you see holiday lights? Do you see an abandoned building as part of your community? And I think that this to me has been one of the most fun components of my own entrepreneurial mindset journey, is sharpening my ability to observe and to practice seeing things differently. Whether that's seeing people differently or observing the way that they work within the world, that's a great place to start this, your own attitude is to practice being able to see. Then ultimately, we're going to get to this concept of asking people more directly, testing your ideas, testing your thoughts, iterating that thought, and then learning what you just solved. Because I think too oftentimes, again, people get in a hurry to try to want to solve that problem. And I really want to be in a hurry to know what I don't know and to be able to learn how I can make that better. So that's this fuzzy front end. And I think that's a really important baseline understanding that being comfortable with ambiguity is a great place to start. So I want to talk a little bit about growth mindset. As I said at the onset, that I like to use this term growth mindset a bit interchangeably with entrepreneurial mindset. And I mean this also in terms of growth versus fixed. because that's important, that you don't, a fixed mindset just does not allow you to explore, and a growth mindset says, what if, and where could I go? And so I use the words of Carol Dweck, who's a fantastic researcher from Stanford, and there's a link there to her Harvard Business Review article that was really awesome, and she's written a number of books that are really worth looking into. But when she says, that the concept of exhibiting a growth mindset involves sharing information, collaborating, innovating, seeking feedback, and admitting errors. So think about your job. Think about the company you work for. And I want you to put them in this next phrase, right? Does my organization embody a growth mindset? Does that encourage appropriate risk taking? Even though some of those may not work out, right? That's a pretty big mindset shift for a lot of corporations, whether it is a small startup or it's a large organization like American Family Insurance. This notion of does my organization allow me to have appropriate risk taking with our new ideas, and also acknowledging that they may not work? And do they reward you for these useful lessons learned? I think that's really also critical. It's just acknowledging that you are experimenting, and through this experimentation, you could begin to grow new customer-centric ideas, and the growth of new customer-centric ideas can lead to new growth opportunities for your organization or for you personally, right? And so I think that I want to encourage you to read more of what Carol Dweck and some of the authors you'll see later in the resources have to say, because I really do think that that learning is critical to you developing your own growth mindset. So that may be one of the first things that I would encourage you to put into the chat as, and don't be specific to your organization. I really don't want to call out or discourage any organization, but I want you to think about that, and think about the organization that you're involved in, and maybe it's even your own company. Is that, do you think that an organization embodies this growth mindset? I mean, are they encouraging you to take appropriate risks and understand that consumer-centric approach? So that's maybe more for the other participants in this discussion also to look at that and say, oh, okay, so maybe I'm not alone because other organizations aren't encouraging that, or yes, other organizations are encouraging it, so I maybe feel a little more confident about presenting new ideas to my own organization. So I'm going to let you do that while we're moving into the next phase. Let me just look real quick and see if there's some other thoughts. So let's please again add those to the chat, and then moving on. Okay, so let me make sure that I'm in the right spot here. Thank you. So I mentioned earlier this concept of design thinking, and you can see that the cadence of this presentation is I want to set some foundations and not prescribe for you that you have to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps, right? I want you to think about all of these as encouraging that growth mindset model. So design thinking was a term used and at first presented by this group called IDEO. They're really a product development, marketing, new product idea, innovation firm. And this specific person, Tim Brown, was one of the people who talked about this process. And as he notes, design thinking has a human-centered core. We've heard that before. It encourages organizations to focus on the people they're creating for. So there's your organization's aptitude towards making sure that they're thinking about their customer. And ideally then moving through a process like this, or using a process of design thinking as a foundation for your problem solving, will allow you to develop new products, better services, and then better internal processes. So I think this is a critical understanding, is that I think too oftentimes people will say design thinking only allows us to create new consumer-centric products. True, but if you really approach this from a consumer-centric or a user-centric approach, you might actually be looking at some of your internal processes and saying, is this working out the best for everyone in our call center? How about our on the road crew? Are we really understanding what their challenges are and presenting new business ideas that could solve their problems? But I think the most important thing to think about with design thinking is that this diagram here on the right, I think, is important because, it talks about the concept of, am I first thinking about the needs of people? Am I then thinking about the viability of my business? And then if there's a technology involved, am I thinking about then the feasibility of that technology? So I think the critical understanding here that's exhibited by this commonly used graph is that not one of these areas is going to necessarily outweigh one of the other ones, that we want to see them as equal legs on the stool, that I'm thinking about the people, I'm thinking about the sustainability of the business itself, and I'm thinking about feasibly whether I can bring a technology, because technology is going to be ubiquitous in almost every company at some level today. Can these three combine to create a new innovation at the middle of that, that confluence of these three ideas relating to the problem that you're trying to solve? And at this point, you might be also thinking, hold on, Paul, I thought that I was going to talk about entrepreneurial mindset. Well, you are, but innovation can't really be decoupled from entrepreneurship, because innovation or new thinking or creating new solutions is absolutely always going to be at the core of that concept of entrepreneurship as well. And so when you think about design thinking, or let's say that you're going to be in a conversation with someone and they're immediately going to say, oh, well, you should use design thinking. Again, don't be intimidated by this term, because the term is very simple to understand. It is just saying, all right, I got to put people at the core, and I have to understand that there are three legs in this stool between the people, the business, and the technology. And if I've done a good job of recognizing the equal value of these three constituents, then I'm covering the right bases and solving my problems. Make sense? So again, there's going to be a lot of follow-up reading that's available to you if you want to know more about design thinking. Okay, so here's the next one that I just love. So problems as opportunities, right? Because I think that I want us to reframe our thinking when you talk about entrepreneurial mindset. All of us, I think, even as kids, most of the time we were encouraged to, or maybe discouraged is right, a better word, that, oh, a problem is bad. The problem comes to you, like that's a bad thing. Don't look for problems. Try to avoid problems. But I want you to really use that term as a problem as an opportunity, right? So let's shift our mindset that says, if I want to change the system, I have to recognize that I can turn an I can't to an I can, or better yet, we will, because I also like the concept of collaboration being part of recognizing a problem as an opportunity yet to be solved. But it's also reframing those observations towards their potential. So when you are in an environment and you are faced with a problem, and it could be something as simple as, and this is a problem we all saw in the last few years, you're at Starbucks and there's this massive line of people waiting at Starbucks, and you're like, oh, this is a problem. I don't want to wait in this line, and there should be something different. Well, of course there should be something different. You should be able to order on your phone and walk up and pick up your drink, right? So that is a very quick, start to finish sort of resolution of that. But I want you to exercise that curiosity to be able to say, oh, okay, I want to reframe this as, I wonder why there's all those people lined up. Like, why are they all queued up there? There should be a different way to approach this, right? And that's what I like about this problem as opportunity model, that says, if I see a problem as an opportunity, then I can change my mindset to say, as an entrepreneur, if I change that model and I solve this pain point for my user or for my customer, if I solve that pain point, there might be some way to make money at that. There might be some way to change that perception of this organization or this process or whatever it is that you're seeing as your problem. And I think that's a great way to not be overwhelmed when you see problems or see problems as barriers, because that's a problem. If you, well, that's interesting. Can we solve that problem of thinking of those as barriers? I think we're trying to do that today. But I want you to see that as an opportunity, because that's where you're going to find this next thing. That's where you're going to find a user pain point. And that may be maybe an unusual jamming together of terms, a consumer pain point. But the concept of a pain point says, all right, if standing in line at Starbucks because I'm late and I'm drowsy and I need a coffee before I get on an airplane or whatever, that is a customer pain point. And if I, with my entrepreneurial mindset, can see that as a pain point, can understand why that pain point exists, then I've got a really nice foundation to be able to say, what are the different ways? Like, why does this problem exist? Why is this a pain? Is it the greatest pain point for the customer? Because if I can solve that pain point for this customer, chances are I can save it for a lot of customers. So I want you to think about that a little bit, just like we did with a few minutes ago with the question about your organizations. I want you to think about even just this morning, right? What has happened in the last 6 hours, let's say, since you were up, that you would consider a pain point? You got up late, you didn't have eggs and you wanted eggs for breakfast. You were getting ready to get on a webinar discussion at noon and you didn't get to eat lunch. Those are all little pain points. But those are all little pain points that can be solved with an entrepreneurial mindset of rethinking it and reframing it. Okay. So moving to the next step in that process. So you can see where I'm trying to get us to evolve to this idea of, if you are curious, you identify, you see problems as opportunities. And what I want you to do now is fall in love with the problem. That seems, again, like a very strange concept, but I want you to really embrace that idea. And that is, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So let's think about that a little bit, because this is something that's very common with a lot of entrepreneurs, as they say, oh, I've got this great idea. Well, chances are just that statement alone says that you already have a solution and you think it's great. So you love your solution and you are not willing to really step back and say, hold on, is this the best solution? I know that throughout the years that I've been working with entrepreneurs, it is probably 80 to 90% of the time, I will ask that entrepreneur who says, I've got a great idea. I said, well, have you Googled that great idea? They said, like, no, I don't want to Google my great idea, because then what if I find somebody who has that great idea? I said, you want to find someone who has that great idea, because one, that will either save you a bunch of money and you won't take a second mortgage out on your house to follow your great idea, and you won't lose your house when you finally do realize that other people have had this great idea and it failed, right? So I want you to really fall in love with that problem and understand that problem, not the solution. You will come up with multiple solutions if you really fully understand that. And so to me, these next couple of steps are that process that we've used so consistently with our students, with other entrepreneurial groups who work with, is asking why. And this seems really simple, but if you stop in almost any time that you are trying to do background research and you say, why is that? Why are these people standing in line at Starbucks? Why are so many people reticent to adopt electric vehicles? Why do people like to stay in Airbnbs when they're on vacation, right? That question, why, is a great key to unlock what we're really trying to get to is the root problem. Okay. And I'm going to use an example for this root problem discussion, because I think that not just falling in love with that problem, but finding what is the root of that problem is important. So I talk to our students about this concept, and I say, if you are hungry, if it's 11 o'clock in the morning and you are hungry, is that the problem, or is there an additional problem that we're not seeing that is the root of the problem? Because if we started to just say, okay, it's 11 o'clock and I want to solve that customer pain point, here's a sandwich, right? Well, we're assuming that the root of the problem is only that they're hungry. But what I want them to do is ask why. Well, why are you hungry? What did you have for breakfast this morning? Well, I had leftover pizza. Okay, well, maybe you didn't have enough protein and you should eat more. Or they say, well, I didn't eat breakfast this morning. Or in college student cases, I was hungover from the night before. And the root of the problem now looks much different when you try to solve the trailing indicator of that problem, and that they're hungry at 11 o'clock. So when I use that as an example to say, this is a very simple approach of asking why are you hungry? And then you can ask why again. There was a lot of articles written about Toyota used to like to ask this question 5 times. If you ask why 5 times, you'll get to a root problem. You also will annoy everybody around you. So I don't think that you need to adhere to that 5 steps, but I do like the idea of using just as simple as why and then listening, that you will get to the root problem. And with that root problem in mind, then you can begin to say, okay, now I'm at a good place to understand all the aspects of a problem and potentially who has that problem, and how I might understand the depth of that problem. So again, asking why, find the root, but don't focus on that trailing indicator as the actual problem itself, because oftentimes it's not going to be the problem. It's going to be just an indication of something that happened. So that's where I get to one of the first little post-its that I really love, which is this, using this little Mad Lib, right? If you say, we will solve problem X for customer Y resulting in Z. Now you may say, well, that seems really simple. Well, yeah, of course it is. That's the idea, that you want to create something that is just really repeatable. So this concept of, I will solve the problem of people wanting to drink coffee in the morning at a Starbucks when it's convenient for them. So there's the problem. And the customer is the customer who wants to drink coffee in the morning, resulting in them receiving their coffee faster and at their own convenience. So we're not getting ahead of ourselves. We're not saying here's a solution. I'm just saying, I understand the problem, I understand the customer, and the results of solving that customer problem will be that customer now has a coffee. I haven't said anything about a solution. I'm just acknowledging the end state of where I want them to be, which is have a coffee in their hand and be happy about Starbucks, right? Okay, so that's where it's simple as, this little statement on a post-it can have incredible power as a problem statement for you to work from. And that's when critical thinking starts to really happen. And this is why I love this. I love adding a critical thinking process to this. So objective analysis and evaluation of an issue, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's a pretty strict sort of terminology. What I want you to do is really start saying, what do I need to know about this problem? What do I need to know about this user? What do I need to know about that end state that I'm searching for? And people will often use that time, well, I want you to think out of the box. Let's think out of the box. But I think, and I worry sometimes that term out of the box implies that this is going to be either chaotic, like, oh, we're going to put our tennis shoes on and we're going to throw a pillow around the room and brainstorm crazy ideas, or that it has to be formalized, like, here are the 4 steps that you have to take in order to think out of the box using critical thinking processes. And I don't think that either of those are the case. I think, in fact, it does not have to be formal, and yet it also does not have to be chaotic. What it does have to be is logical in the process, and that you are fairly rigorous about asking where that root problem is and who that root problem exists for. And is this the greatest pain point that that user is going to experience? And if we can, in fact, satisfy that problem with a result, then we have identified the potential to begin to work on solutions. This last point in the critical thinking that I really want us to make too, which is talk is not cheap. To sort of fly in the face of this old adage, it's actually very productive. Having conversations with that customer and really trying to understand what their motivation is going to allow you to do the first critical steps any entrepreneur is going to need, and that is to try to understand product market fit. If you understand your customer, the person who's theoretically going to pay for you to solve their problem for them, then you can begin to infer a greater depth of understanding of that customer when you begin to create some of your solutions. You can say, okay, I remember I did these 50 interviews with customers and I really listened to them. And if I try solution X, it's really not going to satisfy enough people in that group to make this a viable business. So I want to talk it out. So that's my point with this critical thinking process: is have logical questions, go through a logical process, talk to the right people, but understand that talk can be very productive. So moving on. And please, again, Andy, if you're seeing anything in the chat that I'm missing, because I'm not unable to see it in my presentation, but please just jump in and then let's talk about that. Otherwise, we'll get to it in in about 10 minutes when we open it up, 5 or 10 minutes when we open it up for questions.
Will do.
Great, thank you. So entrepreneurial mindset versus a startup. I touched on this at the beginning, is that I want you to think about these as two separate concepts. Having an entrepreneurial mindset allows you to solve problems through a user-focused lens and understanding problem and opportunity, not just jumping to solution. That has nothing to do with starting a business. So let's try to just divorce those two ideas, because I know just through our conversations with people for a long time that it becomes very intimidating to say, oh, I want to start a business. So don't think about starting a business. Don't think about solving a problem and wait until you're at a point where you have a solution that you really think has a good fit to your consumer, that people will want to potentially pay for in some manner, and then decide, right? Don't start off the path saying, oh my goodness, I have to do a startup and I don't want to do a startup because I don't know anything about business. So thus I'm not going to start. Don't worry about that, right? Let's leave that as an open-ended articulation of your solution, not just the pathway that you have to go on. And I can tell you from my own experience, I did not get into starting my own business because I wanted to start a business. I got into starting my own business because I thought that I had an interesting pathway to help people solve problems for themselves. And as it turns out, having a business to do that made more sense for me. And so I was forced into being a businessman. Oh my goodness, I had at that time, no direct business background. But I didn't let that stop me from having an entrepreneurial mindset, okay? And keeping in mind that the pathway is really dependent on your impact and your funding. And I think that that's a funny sort of statement to make, but you may go through this process and say, oh, I've created this great solution for the insurance industry, but the reality is you may not want to start an insurance company, or you may not believe that that's the best path to go, or you may not have access to funding that would allow you to really articulate that solution in some way. So now you're going to say, oh, if I want to scale that, if I want to grow this idea from this concept that I have, it actually may be faster within some other organization, the organization you're currently working for, an organization that's already in that area, or something completely new where you're bringing an idea. So I think I probably touched on this with Andy before, but we have an insurance company here in Columbus called Root. And Root Insurance was perhaps maybe not the first, but one of the first who said, we think that consumers, this is their consumer focus, consumers would like to purchase their car insurance completely through our mobile app, never talk to a single agent, and be able to get a better rate on their insurance and do everything through their phone, including pay all their bills. And they had done significant amount of research, just understanding that customer and who that customer was. It was not going to be everybody. It was going to tend to be a younger customer, maybe a young millennial or a Gen Z, or someone who just did not like to talk to an agent on the phone. But they realized, okay, we have this very unique technological solution that's going to allow us to do full end-to-end engagement of your auto insurance mobile. But what should we do with it now? Should we try to create a startup? Should we just try to sell this into a larger organization? And ultimately, they did create, their own startup. But they didn't start off that idea by saying, we want to create a startup, thus we're going to put all this pressure on ourselves to be self-sufficient. They said, we want to solve that problem, and we want to create a great solution for this very targeted consumer audience. And we think the best way to do that is to actually do it on our own. So the cool thing was that they didn't start off saying we're going to end up in this direction. They start off by saying solve a problem. So that comes back to where we always want to think about that. So I don't want to go through this conversation today and not talk about sort of the, like, what does impact look like, and then what does fiscal sustainability, because I think that it's important to understand that. So when I say something like, impact should be a high priority and be distinctive, not different. The point is that if you really think about impact, you don't think about profit. And that's going to seem very strange when I'm trying to talk about, say, do you want to use your entrepreneurial mindset to create a business? But I think that we have seen too many examples, and I think those of you, and particularly I would think that if you're here listening in, that you probably have watched Shark Tank, and people get on Shark Tank and they talk about a business idea, and you say, like, that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And the reality is that they probably didn't get funding because of that. And so I want you to be thinking about, what is the impact of, if I have identified the right problem, and I have understood my customer, and I understood how we want to solve their problem, and I've created a solution. Think about the impact of that solution more than whether that solution is going to initially make money, because we're going to put everything in the right order. And I like this term that a friend of mine just used recently. Instead of just looking for a solution that's going to be different, I want you to look at a solution that's going to be distinctive. And there's a book that I put in the reference section called Purple Cow. And that's the concept behind this book, Purple Cow, is that I want you just not to be a different cow, but I want you to be a distinctively different idea. And through that distinction, you will create a unique impact. And then again, impact without sustaining business monetization is a fail. So that's a lot of buzzwords in there. So I'm going to untie that a little bit. I am obviously, as everybody should be in a society, interested in supporting social ventures. Can we create a social venture that will help an underserved community achieve a more positive outcome in their life? Yes, absolutely, we should do that. But too often times we think that, oh, we want to create a social venture. I've got this concept for a social venture, and we're going to be a nonprofit, so thus I don't have to make money. Well, let's just put that aside right at the beginning, because the social venture that hasn't figured out how to make a sustaining business will not impact anybody, because you won't be able to operate. You won't be able to buy anything. You won't be able to employ anybody. You won't be able to market your idea. You won't be able to get to the customer that you're trying to solve the problem for, unless you've actually created a business that has a financial component to it that is impactful. And of course, that goes right back to our entrepreneurial mindset of find the right problem, find the right audience, and then be able to create it. If the solution lends itself to being a social enterprise, but you still are going to have to figure out how to keep it sustaining in order to impact more people. I didn't want to talk too much about funding, so we're going to keep this fairly short in this concept of create a fundable solution, whether it's through profit, the internal funds within your organization, or perhaps even a cost savings measure to the customer that you're working with. There's a whole other conversation that we could have about funding of solutions, but I don't want us to be worried about or thinking about initially whether this is a fundable idea or not, because if you solve the right problem and you have impact, then you will have a fundable solution. But I do think you should ask this question, as our skeptical fella is here in this picture, saying, why should I care? That becomes the impact concept here. It's like, why should I care about the solution that you've presented? Either I am your audience and you've solved a problem for me, or I'm not your, if I don't care, I might not also be your audience. And so you don't have to worry about that. But I think asking yourself that question as you're going through the steps of an entrepreneurial venture, why should I care? Is this something I should care about? So I think that's another critical question to put out. So one of the last points I want to make here, and then we'll get into the questions, and I'm not going to go into this deep. I just wanted to give you sort of the concept of this early stages. So this is up in the right-hand corner. I talk about this double diamond, and the concept is if you follow a linear path along this red line from the inception of a need or your curiosity of an idea on the left-hand side, you're going to go through these two diamond-shaped activities. The first being that the blue diamond on the left, which starts with curiosity through problem identification, user pain points, problem statement, and customer validation. That forms the first diamond, and that as you are identifying where the problem of the opportunity is, and you're gathering information, your diamond is diverging to these points. When you say, I've gathered enough information, now I'm going to converge to the point that I have gathered enough information, I've talked to enough customers, that now I can move into the second diamond of the two double diamonds. And that is where I begin to look at solution ideation, that just coming up with ideas, brainstorming. Once again, validating that with your customers, going out and saying, hey, this is a solution that we have for this problem. What do you think about it? Not leading them. Would you pay for it? What do you think about that? Understand the business model, creating a strategy, and moving to execution. That's, again, so when you are into this second diamond, into the green diamond, solution ideation is going to be diverging into a variety of potential solutions that you're going to validate with your customers. And then through business modeling, you're going to start to converge to a point at the end of that double diamond in the green where you're ready to execute. This, again, is a very, very simple model, but you'd be surprised how well it works when you start thinking about the idea of diverging with research, converging on a problem to be solved, diverging with solutions, and converging back to a point of execution. That simple double diamond is a great way for you to go through these potential 10 steps. I'm going to come back to my very first disclaimer. There can be hundreds and hundreds of steps in an entrepreneurial process. These are just 10 that I think are a good place to start to give you some placeholders. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about here, and then I'm going to get out of presentation mode and let's get into a Q&A for the last 15 minutes, is that these are some resources, 5 of the hundreds of books that I really like to recommend to people that I think are really worth digging into. Lean Startup, Eric Ries has written 2 books, one also called The Startup Way recently that talks about corporate innovation, but I love this Lean Startup model because it's a great step-by-step process. Simon Sinek wrote Starts With Why. There's also an awesome TED Talk that he has done that talks about Start With Why, and I think that's just a great place to solve any problem with your entrepreneurial mindset. A more beautiful question is a researcher who talked about how to actually write the best question. Build is a book that just came out within the last year, written by Tony Fadda, who was the inventor of the Nest line of products, but started with the Nest thermostat, and that is how do you build, unique products through a different mindset. And then again, Purple Cow, this is one of the books that's old now, but boy, did it kick me off into a whole new mindset of thinking about how to not just differentiate, but how to be distinctive with the new product models that you have. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and then open it up and let's see if we can answer a few questions.
Sure thing, Paul. So I've got a few here queued up for you.
Great.
you mentioned, getting curious is kind of that first step, and I know myself, I very much am curious about a lot of things in the world, but I'm wondering personally, where do you find inspiration or curiosity? I know it's around us everywhere, right? I don't know, you touched on that, but where do you enjoy, to find the inspiration most? Is it a setting? Are you walking around? Like what really clicks for you?
So, it's funny because I mentioned early on that I like I like to just see things, right? So I don't know if it started with my own interest in being a people watcher because I like to watch people, and it's not just watch them for their unusual outfits at Walmart. Like I like to see how people navigate each other and how they work, how they're living in the world they're living in. And so that's something that has just become fascinating to me is how people walk around, right? And what they're doing and how they deal with certain situations. So that curiosity for me is the key of all of it. I mean, I think the funny thing is that when you talk to people who've been through a couple of entrepreneurial ventures, all of them have notes on their phone. Like you'll go to the notes section of their phone and there's all these notes. Like I was at the eye doctor and I saw a video for these kind of cool looking allergy bracelets. And I was like, wow, that's interesting that somebody realized that allergy bracelets look pretty bad and maybe people don't want to wear them. And so if that makes sense, this sort of curiosity of just being a good observer, um, and trying to note things in my head or on my phone that I say like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why people are doing that. Do I want to learn more about that, or do I just want to let it pass through? So I also see, and maybe I can jump over into the chat because I see Kevin asks, disruption is all around us, particularly in the last 4 years. This is fertile ground for innovation gap. Yeah. So, it's interesting because I think that human tragedy aside, the pandemic has given us a really interesting reset from an entrepreneurial growth mindset, business mindset, because it essentially wiped away a lot of legacy systems like, oh, I don't know, working from an office. you know, like it just said there were a lot of things that were sort of hanging around in the world that maybe we didn't need anymore, like cash. Who needs cash? Who needs to work in an office? Who needs to work in a particular city and not be a digital nomad? Like I love that the fact that the outcome of the pandemic, again, not looking at the medical side, which was horrific, but it allowed us to really change our process and be disruptive, And I love this term disruptive can be a little bit scary sometimes because I think that puts a lot of pressure on new ideas that say, oh, I have to be disruptive. When let's just see if we can solve a problem. And if it ends up disrupting an industry, that's awesome. But it's also kind of a high bar sometimes and can be a little bit intimidating. Does that make sense?
No, I appreciate that. Kevin, yeah, I just saw you come off mute.
Kevin, did that answer your question?
No, well, it was a question and a statement. The disruption that I refer to is much more of an involuntary element. The disruption, we didn't mean to have the disruption, it's there, but it creates opportunity, to your point, if you look at a problem as an opportunity. But
yes,
but there's others that aren't necessarily. Disruption is just based on customer preferences and change. You see opportunity and gaps that you can fill within some of the tools that are out there. I think the biggest element that I've started to experience is it's not that the tools and the technology and elements aren't there. It's the people that have to change.
No, I think that's a great observation because technology will always be changing. We're never going to say, oh, I'm going to be ahead of that. The reality is that you're going to change the people. The customer's going to have a different interest. You're going to create something with a mashing together of that technology and the business and the needs of the consumer that's going to be different than what somebody had done in the past. That makes sense?
Agreed. Yep.
So Andy, you got any other questions?
Yeah.
It looks like some good ones.
Yeah. It looks like Baruch asked a question just about the presentation slide. So Paul will pass those along to me, and then I'll certainly email them out to the folks who registered for this event. So whatever email address you use to register for this event, I will go ahead and pass along those slides.
And my email address will be on there. I love having conversations, particularly with anybody who says like, I'm sort of interested in this. What do you think about that? I will, I'm an old guy who spends a lot of time Like, I just love to ask, I like talking about people about their new ideas. So anytime I can do that, I'm always open for that, that notion. So.
Sure. Another question here for you, Paul. So can you give us an example of a solution you came up with? I know you mentioned starting several businesses, but
Yeah.
a solution that you came up with that was distinctive. I know you mentioned the difference between just unique
But just
or-
differentiated and distinctive. So this is going to take us back a long way. And then I worked on a dispenser for a pharmaceutical company that would allow people who had arthritis to take their naproxen or take the medication that they needed. Now, think about that. This is an audience who doesn't have very good dexterity, because if they've got advanced arthritis, they don't have very good finger control. They may not have even a lot of strength. It perhaps also correlates to them being older, and maybe they don't have great eyesight. So now let's use those parameters to design a product or design a solution that also can't be opened by an inquisitive 5-year-old, right? Who's got great dexterity, who is going to just sit there for an hour trying to get at this stuff, right? And so that was both maybe one of my more clever solutions to a new business model, but also perhaps one of my biggest failures, if I can say, in that, yes, we did create a solution that would allow the patient to dispense a tablet through this dispenser using their body weight or the weight of a book or just some other assistant that they would have around their house to be able to use that. But I also felt that because that solution was still going to add complexity to the taking of that medication by, they would have to find a book or they'd have to find a can of beans that they could put on the top of the thing, that I didn't think I solved it, right? But maybe that's okay. Is that, maybe that's the dilemma of a good entrepreneur, is you never ultimately say that solution is perfect. It will never get any better. I'm genius, right? That's the best thing. I mean, this is why I like that book by Tony Fadda, because Fadda has just continued to say, how can I take mundane things in the world and just make them better, make them more accessible to people, right?
Yeah, thank you for that, Paul. It's a cool example that you were able to share there. I appreciate that. We've got time for one last question. Here at DreamBank, we are a community that is built up of fellow fearless dreamers. And I was wondering, what's one piece of advice that you would have for someone who's actively pursuing a dream?
Don't let people discourage you with their negative approach, right? Because there will be a sea of people that will tell you you're not going to be successful. Don't waste your money. Just take your day job. Quit thinking outside of the norm. And that, because people naturally want to find the status quo, back to momentum and sitting on the couch. I mean, that is the natural path. So this is partly why I'm here. Like, I'm not here to say, oh, I've done great things. I've not done great things, but I'm very enthusiastic and very passionate about creating some confidence in each of you to say, gosh, like I can solve that problem. I can find people who can help me solve that problem. And I think that's the best thing you could do is surround yourself with people who are like, oh, that's a great idea. You should think about that, instead of people who say like, oh, don't do that. Don't go to that seminar. Don't go listen to that person. Don't read that book. Don't, because they don't have the guts to be open-minded. I want you to have the guts to be open-minded, because it's just going to make things way more fun. Like when you start solving problems, even if it's little stuff, you start solving problems for yourself, great. I love what Walter puts here, like fail fast, fail often, learn, innovate, go forward. Absolutely. All those things, particularly the fail forward model. If you jam those together, I like that. Like, go try stuff. If it fails, then fine, move ahead. I just saw a great little blurb from Dolly Parton saying like, look, I didn't have anything, so I could fail all day long because I never lost anything. And in that attitude, she just continued to prosper and go forward. And I think that's the best thing you can do as an entrepreneur, is just stay positive. Don't let people bring you down, and just keep thinking of cool ideas and surround yourself with people who support you.
I love that.
Like DreamBank, right?
I love that, Paul. Thank you so much for that. As we wrap up here, I know a couple people have messaged me individually asking me about this event in particular, along with the slides. So this event is being recorded. We do air all of our events roughly a week after they have gone live on our YouTube page. I went and put that link in there as well, so you can go and back and reference this as needed. And in addition to viewing all of the other wonderful events that we've been putting out virtually since about the end of March of 2020. So take a peek at that and see, there might be something that resonates with you there. But we'll go ahead and kind of wrap things up there. Thank you, Paul, for putting this together. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us here at DreamBank. And with that, we will see you all next time. Take care.
Great, thanks.